The morning light spilled through the glass walls of the airport, turning the marble floor into a river of gold. The place was alive with the rhythm of departure, footsteps, rolling suitcases, the distant voice announcing flight delays. Among the noise moved Elijah Grant, a man who seemed to belong to a different world. His presence was quiet but commanding, the kind of calm that came not from arrogance, but from discipline. A perfectly tailored navy suit, a discreet luxury watch, and eyes that carried the weight of years spent building an empire from scratch. Today, Elijah wasn't just another passenger. He was a man on his way to close one of the biggest tech deals in Europe, a contract that could shift markets. He walked with quiet confidence toward the first-class check-in counter, ticket in hand, ready for a smooth morning. But as he approached the desk, something in the air changed. Behind the counter, the receptionist looked up and blinked twice, her polite smile faltering for just a second. She recovered quickly, but her tone came sharp, polished with something colder. "Good morning, sir. This line's for first-class passengers only." Elijah's brow lifted slightly. His voice stayed calm, patient. "I'm aware," he said softly, handing her the ticket. "Here's my boarding pass." The woman took it hesitantly, scanning it once, then twice. Her eyes darted from the ticket to Elijah, her smile tightening. "I see," she murmured, glancing toward a colleague. "I just need to confirm something. Could you wait a moment?" Elijah nodded, but his jaw tightened. Around him, other travelers all dressed in casual wealth breezed through with quick greetings and practiced smiles. No questions, no hesitation. But for him, a man whose skin carried the color of his story, everything required a second look. After a short pause, the receptionist leaned slightly forward. "Sir, are you sure this is your booking? Sometimes these tickets are transferred or mistaken." Elijah's eyes met hers. Calm, steady, unflinching. "I booked it myself, under Grant Holdings International." His voice carried no anger, only clarity. But in that still moment, the air between them shifted. She looked embarrassed but not enough to stop. "I see. Well, we just have to follow procedure," she replied, motioning subtly for a supervisor. Elijah took a deep breath. Inside, he felt the familiar sting of déjà vu, the quiet discrimination, dressed in politeness. The kind he'd seen as a young entrepreneur when banks wouldn't lend him money, when investors called him ambitious but unrealistic, when he'd walked into boardrooms and seen people assume he was there to serve coffee instead of owning the building. He thought those days were long gone. But here, in this pristine terminal, history repeated itself, not loudly, but in whispers and glances. The supervisor arrived. A man in his 50s with a clipped British accent and a self-assured smile. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd already chosen a side. The receptionist replied quickly. "This gentleman claims he has a first-class seat, but the system seems unclear." Elijah handed over his phone, showing the digital confirmation, the purchase receipt, and the assigned seat number. "Everything is perfectly clear," he said. "Unless your system refuses to read my name." The supervisor hesitated, a flicker of discomfort, a flash of truth, before he straightened. "We'll get it sorted," he said finally, turning to type. But the damage was done. Around them, eyes lingered. A few passengers whispered, curious, others judgmental. A man nearby chuckled quietly to his wife. "Probably tried to upgrade last minute," he said. The woman smirked. "Happens all the time." Elijah heard it. He didn't turn, didn't flinch. He just waited, expressionless, while the supervisor tapped the keyboard. Finally, the printer clicked, and the supervisor handed over the boarding pass. "All set, Mr. Grant. You're in seat 1A. Enjoy your flight." Elijah took the ticket. "Thank you," he said simply, and turned to leave. But as he walked away, the receptionist leaned toward her colleague, whispering something under her breath. A quiet laugh followed. He caught the sound but not the words. He didn't need to. He knew that tone. He walked toward the security gate, the weight of invisible eyes following him. Inside, his mind was a storm behind a mask of composure. He had learned, long ago, that power wasn't in the voice that shouted, it was in the silence that decided when to speak. As he passed through the first-class lounge, a young attendant smiled warmly. "Welcome, Mr. Grant. Would you like champagne before boarding?" He smiled faintly. "No, thank you." But his calm eyes wandered to the window, overlooking the tarmac where the plane waited. He could see the airline's logo glinting in the sunlight. That same logo that, within minutes, would become a symbol of arrogance and ignorance. A small voice inside him whispered, "Let it go." But another, quieter, sharper, said, "Not this time." He sat down, opened his laptop, and began reviewing the presentation for his Geneva meeting. His assistant's message blinked at the top of the screen. "Your private jet will be available tomorrow, sir. Sorry again about today's commercial flight." Elijah typed back, "No worries. Sometimes, it's good to see things from the ground." He hit send, closed the laptop, and leaned back. The memory of the receptionist's smirk burned in his mind. He wasn't angry, not in the loud, reckless way. His anger was cold, focused, patient, the kind that builds quietly until it reshapes the world. As the boarding announcement echoed through the lounge, Elijah stood, collected his bag, and walked toward the gate. Passengers glanced up again, still curious about the man they'd seen questioned earlier. Some with pity, some with disdain. None of them knew they were witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. At the gate, the same receptionist looked up, forcing another smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Grant." He looked at her for a brief second, long enough for her to sense something she couldn't name. Power, control, the calm before a storm. Then he nodded and walked on board. Inside the cabin, soft music played as attendants greeted passengers. The first-class seats glowed under golden lights. Elijah placed his briefcase beside him, fastened his belt, and stared quietly out the window as the engines began to hum. The irony wasn't lost on him. Sitting in the very seat he'd been told he didn't deserve, he closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered under his breath, "Let's see how this flight really ends." Outside, the plane began to taxi, carrying not just a man on a journey, but a storm waiting to unfold, one that would soon make history in ways no one at that airport could imagine. The boarding gate buzzed with the usual chaos, passengers checking phones, kids crying, the smell of coffee mixing with jet fuel. Elijah stood quietly at the front of the first-class line, his boarding pass ready. He was calm, collected, patient. To him, this was just another flight, until the attendant looked up. Her name tag read Chloe. She had the same polite smile as before, but this time, it didn't reach her eyes. She scanned his pass, frowned, and then scanned again. The machine beeped twice. A glitch, maybe, but Chloe's expression hardened as if she'd found proof of a crime. "Ah, sir," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This ticket seems invalid. Are you sure this belongs to you?" Elijah blinked once, then twice. The line behind him fell silent. Eyes turned, whispers started. "Yes," he said softly. "It's mine. Purchased directly from your website." Chloe tilted her head, her tone dripping with fake politeness. "It's just that. First-class seats are reserved for premium members and corporate clients. Maybe you're meant to book business class." A faint murmur rippled through the nearby crowd. A man in a gray suit smirked. "Happens all the time," he muttered to his wife. Elijah's jaw flexed slightly. He handed over his ID. "My name's Elijah Grant. You'll find my booking confirmed under Grant Holdings International." But Chloe only half. She waved over another attendant. "Can you double-check this? The system's showing something strange." Elijah's pulse was steady, but the humiliation crawled in slow. Not because he cared what they thought, but because he knew exactly what this was. The look, the doubt, the hesitation. He'd seen it his entire life, from classrooms to boardrooms. The second attendant took his ticket, scanned it again, then shrugged. "It says first class." Maybe the printer glitched, but Chloe wasn't ready to back down. She forced a nervous laugh. "You never know these days. People make fake passes all the time." Then, louder, "Security, can we have a verification check here, please?" The words hit like a hammer. Security. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Passengers leaned to see. A few pulled out phones, recording discreetly. Elijah felt dozens of eyes pierce through him. Eyes that didn't see a CEO, a leader, or a man who'd built an empire. They saw only what they expected to see. Two uniformed guards approached, one speaking into a radio. "What's the issue?" Chloe straightened. "Possible ticket fraud. Says first class, but the name doesn't match in the system." Elijah's voice stayed calm, unshaken. "It matches perfectly. Perhaps your system doesn't recognize my name yet, but it soon will." The taller guard frowned. "Sir, can you step aside while we sort this out?" He could have argued. He could have shouted, but instead, Elijah stepped aside, adjusting his cufflinks like a man preparing for a board meeting. Not a public embarrassment. He stood there, silent, dignified, as the crowd whispered. Maybe he snuck in from economy. Could be one of those influencers trying to flex. No, look at his watch. That's real. But why would someone rich fly commercial? Every comment hit like a paper cut. Small, sharp, bleeding pride in silence. The manager finally arrived. A woman in a navy blazer, carrying herself with authority. She looked Elijah up and down, then at the flustered attendant. "What's going on here?" Chloe jumped in. "His ticket came up as invalid. I thought it best to verify." The manager took the ticket, glanced at the name, and then at Elijah's ID. Her expression froze, a flash of recognition, then discomfort. She'd heard that name before. "Elijah Grant," she murmured under her breath. Then, more carefully, "Sir, we just need a moment to confirm the details with corporate." Elijah smiled faintly. "Of course, take all the time you need." The calm in his voice unsettled her. Most people in his position would be angry, loud, defensive, but he was composed, too composed. It made her uneasy. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. The line behind him grew restless. Someone groaned, "Can we just board already?" The manager finally turned back, clearly anxious. "Sir, it seems there was a minor technical error. Your ticket is indeed valid." Chloe blinked. "Wait, really?" "Yes," the manager said, forcing a smile. "Mr. Grant, please welcome aboard." But the damage was done. The laughter, the stares, the judgment, the phones that might have recorded the moment. Elijah took back his boarding pass. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but heavy. He didn't look angry, just tired. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work, but from years of being doubted. He stepped forward, but before entering the jet bridge, he paused. His gaze drifted back to the crowd, to the same faces that had watched him being questioned. Like a criminal, every eye looked away. Not one apology, not one word. He turned and walked down the jet bridge, each step echoing like a countdown. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin glowed in warm light. The flight attendants greeted him with rehearsed smiles, unaware of what had just happened outside. Elijah took his seat 1A and placed his bag down. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stared out the window, watching the runway blur under the morning sun. Inside, a storm was brewing, quiet, calculated, and far from over. He thought of every insult he'd ever swallowed, every moment he'd had to prove himself twice just to be seen as equal. His face stayed calm, but his mind whispered the same phrase, over and over, "Not this time." As the engines roared and the plane began to taxi, Elijah closed his eyes and took a slow breath. The humiliation had been public, but soon, so would the lesson. The air at Gate 47 felt heavier than before. The whispers hadn't stopped since the incident. A few people had gone quiet, pretending to scroll through their phones, while others still looked in Elijah's direction, half curious, half ashamed. He stood a few feet away from the counter, calm on the outside, silent on the inside. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable, but under that silence, something was shifting. The humiliation from minutes earlier still lingered in the air, raw, visible. The gate attendant, Chloe, kept glancing nervously at him. The manager had already retreated, hoping the moment would simply fade away. But fate had other plans. Just then, a small voice cut through the tension. "Mom, isn't that him?" Everyone turned. A boy, no older than 12, stood near the seating area, pointing directly at Elijah. His mother hushed him. "Embarrassed, sweetheart. Don't point," she whispered. But the boy didn't stop. His voice grew more certain. "No, I'm serious. That's Elijah Grant from Forbes. He's on the cover of Dad's business magazine." For a split second, time froze. Passengers exchanged puzzled looks. Some frowned. Others pulled out their phones and began to type his name. Within seconds, screens lit up with headlines. Elijah Grant, the billionaire behind Novatech, the self-made CEO who revolutionized global AI. And just like that, the murmurs turned into gasps. "That's him," someone whispered. "The guy who owns half of the tech startups in New York." "Oh my God, the same man they just accused of faking a ticket." The realization hit the staff like a wave. Chloe's face drained of color. The second attendant bit her lip, stepping back, avoiding Elijah's gaze. Elijah remained still. No gloating, no anger, just quiet composure, the kind that made the silence deafening. The boy, curious and innocent, approached him shyly. "Sir, I read about you in school. You made those learning tablets for poor kids, right?" Elijah turned to him slowly, his expression softening. "That's right," he said with a small smile. "Education shouldn't depend on where you're born." The boy grinned proudly. "That's so cool. My teacher said you started with nothing." Elijah chuckled lightly, though his eyes still carried the weight of the moment. She was right about that too. The boy's mother stepped forward, apologizing nervously. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Grant. He's just excited. We didn't mean to intrude." Elijah shook his head gently. "No apology needed. He's the only one here who saw me for who I am." That line landed heavy, not shouted, not meant to humiliate, but every syllable carried truth. The kind of truth that made people uncomfortable. Behind the counter, Chloe swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her badge. "Mr. Grant, I didn't realize." Elijah raised his hand slightly, cutting her off. "No need to explain." His voice was even calm, but the calm that hides a storm, the kind that can turn silence into judgment. He took a step closer to the counter, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. "Could you get me your supervisor's direct contact, please?" Chloe hesitated, eyes darting nervously. "Of course, just a moment." She scribbled something on a note and slid it toward him like a student handing over late homework. "Thank you," Elijah said, tucking it neatly into his jacket pocket. Then he added quietly, "Make sure it's the right number. I'd hate to have to verify it again." A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the nearby passengers, not mocking, but uneasy. They could feel the balance of power shifting. Quietly and completely. As Elijah turned to leave, the young boy called out again, "Mr. Grant, are you going to get them in trouble?" He paused, then looked over his shoulder, his tone gentle, yet layered with meaning. "No, son. People like them teach lessons better than punishment ever could." He gave a small nod, then walked toward the terminal exit, his steps measured, his calm now sharper than any outburst could have been. The crowd parted instinctively as he passed, not out of fear, but out of newfound respect. Phones recorded silently, eyes followed him. The same people who had once doubted him now whispered his name with reverence. "Did you see how he handled that? He didn't even raise his voice. Man, that's power right there." Outside the terminal glass, sunlight struck the wing of a waiting aircraft. Elijah paused, gazing out for a long moment. His reflection in the window stared back, calm, collected, dangerous in silence. In that reflection, he saw both versions of himself. The man who had once begged for investors to take him seriously, and the one who now controlled markets with a phone call. He exhaled slowly. Power doesn't need to shout, he murmured under his breath. It just needs to act. Then, without another glance back, he walked toward the private exit. The hum of the engines filled the cabin of Elijah Grant's private jet, a quiet, elegant world floating above the clouds. The city lights below were fading into a blur, but his mind, it wasn't resting. He sat in silence, his gaze locked on the endless horizon, the glow from the sunset painting his sharp features in gold. To anyone watching, he looked calm, almost serene. But behind that calm was a storm waiting to unfold. His assistant, Jordan, sat across from him, uneasy. He had worked for Elijah for years, long enough to recognize when that silence meant something big was brewing. Clearing his throat, he finally spoke. Sir, I should have arranged your usual charter. I didn't expect the commercial flight to. Elijah lifted a hand gently, cutting him off without a hint of anger. It's all right, Jordan, he said softly, his voice measured and calm. Sometimes, life rearranges your schedule to teach you something you didn't know you needed to learn. Jordan looked down, guilt etched on his face. But what they did, it was humiliating. They treated you like. Elijah's eyes flickered with emotion. Like I didn't belong, he finished for him. Yes, I felt it. Every stare, every whisper, every assumption. He leaned back, folding his hands together. But anger doesn't change people. Power does, perspective does. The jet cut through a field of clouds, its wings slicing the dusk. Elijah turned to look out the window again. The reflection staring back wasn't one of defeat, it was determination taking form. Jordan hesitated, then asked quietly, What are you thinking, sir? A faint smile curved Elijah's lips. That respect can't be demanded. It has to be taught. And some lessons. He paused, his gaze sharpening. Need to be loud enough for the world to hear. Jordan's brow furrowed. You're not talking about a complaint, are you? Elijah's chuckle was low, almost amused. No, complaints get buried in email folders. I'm talking about something they can't ignore. The camera lingers on his face as he speaks those words, calm, controlled, but carrying a quiet fire. He opens his laptop, the glow from the screen illuminating his focused expression. Pull up everything you can on that airline. He instructs. Financials, ownership structure, shareholder patterns. I want to know who truly runs that company. Jordan blinks, surprised. Sir, you don't mean. Elijah looks up, his tone calm but resolute. I mean exactly what you're thinking. The sound of fingers tapping the keyboard fills the cabin. Charts, graphs, stock numbers flicker across the screen. Elijah scans them with surgical precision. Every piece of data feeds into the silent storm behind his eyes. A flashback sequence begins to play. The gate attendant's mocking smirk, the gasps from onlookers, the whispering crowd. Each moment plays in slow motion, echoing against the sound of the jet engine's dot. Then the narration fades in, steady and reflective. People often mistake calm for weakness, but true power never raises its voice. It plans, it moves, and when it finally acts, the world listens. Jordan looks up again, unsure whether to feel fear or admiration. You're really going to do it, aren't you? Elijah closes the laptop gently and looks him in the eye. I'm going to teach them what it feels like, he says. Not with anger, with understanding and consequence. The jet pierces through the last layer of clouds, breaking into a clear night sky full of stars. Elijah leans back in his seat, eyes closing briefly. A man at peace, but only on the surface. Inside, a vision is forming, precise, deliberate, unstoppable. As the engines hum softly in the background, the narrator's voice deepens. He wasn't just a man wronged. He was a man with the power to rewrite the ending. The camera slowly pans toward the window, where the reflection of Elijah's face merges with the distant city lights below, the same city where, soon, his decision would shake an entire industry. Then, in a quiet, resolute tone, Elijah murmurs to himself, Tomorrow, we begin. The next morning, the glass walls of Grant Holdings Tower reflected the rising sun, sharp, golden, relentless. Inside, Elijah Grant stood at the head of a sleek conference table, surrounded by his most trusted executives. His expression was calm, but his tone carried quiet authority. Find out everything, he said. I want to know who owns them, who runs them, who hides behind their policies. Every number, every name, every lawsuit. Don't leave a stone unturned. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The room was silent, filled only with the scratching of pens and the tapping of keyboards as his words sank in. Within minutes, teams were already moving. Emails shot across departments. Calls were made to legal contacts, financial analysts, and investigators across 3 continents. Grant Holdings, a conglomerate known for its reach in tech, logistics, and aviation, had just shifted its full attention to one target, the airline that had humiliated its CEO. As Elijah watched the operation unfold, he turned toward the window, his reflection layered over the skyline. The narration voice grows softer here, reflective. He wasn't after revenge. He was after truth, the kind of truth that exposed what was hidden beneath years of polished advertising and corporate smiles. Hours turned into days. Inside the company's intelligence division, analysts stared at walls of data, stock charts, financial disclosures, internal complaint logs, and slowly, patterns began to emerge. One evening, Jordan, Elijah's assistant, walked briskly into his office, holding a thick report. "Sir, you'll want to see this." Elijah looked up from his laptop. "Tell me." Jordan hesitated, flipping through the pages. "It's worse than we thought. This airline's been bleeding money for years. But it's not just financial, it's ethical. Multiple discrimination complaints, settlements buried under non-disclosure agreements, senior executives ignoring reports from minority staff." Elijah leaned back slowly, absorbing every word. His gaze didn't waver. "So the rot isn't new. It's been there all along." Jordan nodded. "They've been disguising it with flashy PR, but internally, it's chaos. Toxic culture, management turnover, low morale. And the board, they're desperate to sell before the next quarterly report leaks." For a long moment, Elijah said nothing. The hum of the city outside filled the silence. Then, with quiet finality, he spoke. "Then we won't just expose them. We'll own them." Cut to a cinematic montage. Elijah's team, working around the clock. Lawyers, drafting acquisition strategies. Analysts building valuation models. Phones ringing, contracts printing, numbers flashing across screens. The music builds, tense but precise, the sound of an empire moving with intent. As the narrator continues. "In the world of business, emotion is a weakness, but focus, that's the weapon of kings." By the third day, a full picture emerged. The airline, Aerosky International, was drowning. Mismanagement had driven its stock down nearly 40% in a year. Investors were fleeing, and public confidence was fragile, resting on a thread of illusion. Elijah studied the report under dim office light, his fingers tracing the headline. "Aerosky's struggles deepen amid new allegations." Jordan watched him carefully. "You could buy them outright, sir. Your capital reserves are more than enough." Elijah's lips curved slightly, the kind of smile that carried meaning. "Buying them is easy. What comes next? That's what matters." The room went quiet again. Elijah rose from his chair and walked to the wall, where a world map hung in silver and glass. He placed a marker over Aerosky's main hub, a bold red dot spreading across the map. "They wanted to remind me where they think I belong," he said softly. "Now I'll remind them where they stand." A pause. Then, almost to himself, he added, "Every insult carries a cost. Some just take longer to collect." Jordan exhaled slowly. "What do you want us to do next?" Elijah turned, eyes steady. "Begin silent negotiations. Through intermediaries only. No press, no leaks. I want control of their shares before anyone realizes who's behind it." The next few minutes played like a chess match, his advisors suggesting angles, his legal chief proposing holding companies, his finance head drafting purchase structures to conceal identity. Every move was deliberate, strategic, and clean. Meanwhile, the narration deepens. Power, when patient, becomes invisible. And invisibility is how empires changed the world. As night fell, Elijah stood alone by the window again. The city lights shimmered beneath him, the same city that once whispered when he was turned away at that airport gate. Now, those same whispers would soon echo in boardrooms, on news broadcasts, and in shareholders' meetings. He placed the report on his desk, closing it with finality. "Prepare the acquisition framework," he said. "By the end of the week, I want Aerosky to be ours." Jordan hesitated. "All of it." Elijah looked at him, a calm, controlled fire behind his gaze. "All of it." The screen cuts to black, leaving only the hum of the city and the narrator's final line for this chapter. He wasn't just uncovering corruption, he was laying the foundation for justice, one signature at a time. Fade out. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it moves in silence, calculated, invisible, and unstoppable. As dawn broke over the city skyline, Elijah Grant's empire was already in motion. Not through boardrooms or press conferences, but through encrypted calls, coded emails, and unmarked offices. This was not a declaration of war, it was a quiet storm. Weeks had passed since that humiliating day at the airport. The world had moved on, but Elijah hadn't. To the outside world, he was just another CEO, focused, disciplined, quietly steering his multinational toward another billion-dollar quarter. But behind closed doors, every move he made was part of something far larger. He had no need for revenge, that shouted. What he sought was justice, the kind that rewrote balance sheets and shifted ownership under the nose of arrogance. Scene 1, Strategy Room. Grant Holdings Tower. The conference room was dimly lit, screens glowing with charts and legal filings. Around the oval table sat Elijah's most trusted advisors, specialists in law, finance, and acquisition. Jordan, his assistant, opened the meeting. "We've secured 3 holding entities, Omega Capital, Horizon Trust, and North Peak Ventures. All are offshore, fully anonymous. Each will buy small stakes across multiple markets. No single purchase will draw attention. Elijah nodded slowly, scanning the documents. Good. Keep purchases under 2% per entity until we hit 30 total. Once we cross 31, I want a full audit of shareholder reactions. A soft murmur of acknowledgement rippled across the room. His legal counsel leaned forward. Sir, if the media catches on, it could alert the board before we're ready. Elijah's expression didn't change. Then we'll make sure they never do. The art of control, he said, is making others believe they still have it. The team fell silent. Every instruction was recorded, encrypted, and stored in secure offline servers. Every dollar that moved did so quietly, like water through hidden channels. At Aerosky's headquarters, executives paced nervously. Stock prices were falling, not from bad press, but from uncertainty. Investors whispered that someone was pulling strings. A senior board member slammed his hand on the table. Who's selling this fast? Who's buying us out? No one had an answer. The CEO, a man who had once ordered Elijah to be verified, stared blankly at the market feed. Whoever it is, he muttered, they're smart. Too smart, but it was already too late. Elijah's team watched from their tower across the city as the airline stock hit its lowest point in 5 years. Jordan turned to him. Sir, we can take controlling interest today. The market's wide open. Elijah glanced at the digital clock on the wall. 10:14 a.m. Do it, he said quietly. Let's bring this home. Within minutes, millions of shares moved one transaction at a time, through dozens of invisible hands. And by noon, Elijah Grant owned 51% of the airline that had once denied him dignity. No press release. No fanfare. No headlines. Just numbers, silent, sharp, irreversible. Later that evening, the wind howled softly outside Elijah's penthouse office. The lights of the city shimmered below, reflections dancing on the glass walls. Jordan entered, holding a sleek black folder. His eyes gleamed with restrained excitement. It's done, sir. All filings are complete. Through your subsidiaries and trusts, you now hold the controlling majority of Aerosky International. Elijah didn't smile. He simply stared out the window for a long moment. Strange, he said finally, how quickly arrogance collapses under its own weight. He turned to Jordan. What about the board? Any reaction? Jordan shook his head. They still believe it's institutional investors buying in. No one has connected it to you. A faint smirk touched Elijah's face. Good. Let them sleep well tonight. Tomorrow we'll wake them differently. He opened the folder, flipping through pages of ownership summaries and transaction histories. Every line confirmed the truth. Control was his. A week later, Aerosky's executives gathered for their quarterly board meeting. Tension filled the air as numbers were presented: falling revenues, rising complaints, and investor exits. The chairman cleared his throat. We've received notice from our new majority shareholder. They're requesting an emergency session. The CEO frowned. Majority shareholder. Who? A pause. Papers shuffled. Then the chairman read the name slowly, confusion twisting his tone. Grant Aviation Holdings. The room fell silent. Grant, the CEO repeated. His face went pale. Another director leaned in. Wait, as in Elijah Grant? No one spoke. But in that silence, truth landed heavier than any voice could. The CEO's mind raced, flashes of that day at the airport. The condescending tone he'd used, the humiliation he'd caused, and now, the man he dismissed as unfit for first class owned his company. Jordan entered again, holding a press briefing draft. They'll need your statement once the takeover goes public tomorrow. Elijah was seated in quiet reflection, a single lamp illuminating his desk. He looked up, his voice calm, almost detached. No statement, he said. Not yet. I want them to live in the silence they gave me. The noise will come later. Jordan hesitated. Should we inform the employees? Elijah closed the folder in front of him. Not yet. They'll learn when it matters most, not through fear, but through change. He leaned back, gazing at the skyline again, a pattern of light and shadow that mirrored his own journey. They thought denying me a seat would make me small, he said quietly. But some lessons can only be taught from the top. As the camera pans across city lights, the narration deepens, slow, cinematic, deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't seek revenge in chaos. He simply did what only power can. He shifted the world, one quiet move at a time. Cut to a montage. Board members reading the ownership documents in shock. The airline's logo illuminated on a skyscraper now under new control. Elijah walking down an airport runway at sunrise. The hum of jet engines around him. He pauses, adjusting his cufflinks, the same calm, dignified man he's always been. Only now, he owns the sky that once tried to shut him out. The narrator's final line fades as Elijah steps into his private jet, the door closing behind him. Respect isn't given by status or seat class. It's earned, and sometimes, reclaimed, by those who refuse to bow. The engines roar softly as the jet ascends into the horizon, carrying with it the weight of justice served silently. The sun rose over the city skyline, slicing through the glass towers like a blade of light. It was an ordinary morning for most, but not for the airline that once turned away the man now walking toward their headquarters. Elijah Kane stepped out of his car in a tailored gray suit. calm as ever, but there was a quiet storm in his eyes. Every step echoed purpose. He wasn't just a man anymore, he was a symbol of everything they had underestimated. The doorman, the same one who once looked past him without greeting, hurried to open the door. Now, Elijah nodded slightly, neither cold nor kind, just silent acknowledgement. He had no need for revenge in words. His presence alone said everything. Inside, the air buzzed with nervous energy. Executives rushed between glass rooms, whispering about the mysterious new owner who had requested a full board meeting. No one knew who he was, but everyone knew today would change something big. At 9 a.m. sharp, the boardroom filled. The long polished table gleamed under the soft lights. A dozen executives sat, including the CEO, Robert Hemsley, a man known for arrogance and cutting corners. He adjusted his tie, forcing a smirk. "Let's make this quick," Robert muttered. "Whoever this new owner is, I hope he knows who runs this company." A quiet knock at the door. The assistant peeked in. "Sir, he's here." The door opened. Elijah walked in. For a moment, silence. Every eye turned to him. Some faces went pale. The flight attendant who had denied him that day sat near the end of the table, her mouth slightly open, as if time itself had stopped. Elijah's voice broke the silence, calm and steady. "Good morning. I appreciate you all coming on time." He took the seat, and set down a thin black folder. His movements were deliberate, composed. He looked around the table slowly, meeting each gaze. "I'm Elijah Kane," he continued, "and as of last week, through multiple holding companies, my firm has acquired controlling interest in this airline." The words hit like thunder. Robert blinked, stunned. "That's impossible. We'd have known," Elijah interrupted gently. "No, Robert, you wouldn't have, because I didn't want you to know. Not until today." He leaned back, the power in his posture effortless. "I didn't come here to celebrate or to humiliate anyone. I came here because accountability has been long overdue." Murmurs rippled around the table. The HR head shifted uncomfortably, and the flight supervisor who had laughed at him looked ready to disappear into the floor. Elijah opened the folder. Inside were reports, complaints, and statistics. Years of ignored discrimination cases, unethical decisions, and employee mistreatment. He slid the papers across the table. "Before you ask," Elijah said softly, "I didn't buy this airline out of anger. I bought it because I refused to let a company built on arrogance continue to fly above accountability." He paused, letting the silence breathe. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. Robert leaned forward, voice trembling between defiance and fear. "So, what happens now?" Elijah met his eyes. "Now, we clean house." He turned to his assistant, Maya, who had been standing by the door. "Maya, you have the documents." She nodded, handing him a set of termination letters and restructuring plans. Elijah began reading the names, one by one. The executives who had ignored employee complaints, the ones who approved discriminatory hiring policies, the ones who mocked, dismissed, or exploited their staff. Each name was met with silence. No one argued. No one dared. As he reached the end of the list, Elijah stopped. His gaze landed on the woman who had refused him that seat, the flight attendant. She was trembling, her eyes wet. "Elijah," she whispered. I didn't know who you were. I was just following." He held up a hand, gently. "I know, and that's the problem. You saw status before humanity. You saw color before courtesy. That's not your fault alone, it's the system's. But it ends today." She lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheek. Elijah turned back to the board. "Effective immediately, operations will pause. The airline will undergo full restructuring, leadership, training, ethics, culture. If we can't fly with dignity, we don't fly at all." The words hung heavy in the air. "We don't fly at all." A few executives stared, speechless. The man they had dismissed, mocked, and belittled had just grounded their empire with a single sentence. Robert, red-faced, slammed a hand on the table. "You can't do this. You'll destroy everything we've built." Elijah looked up. Calm as ever. "Maybe destruction is what's needed before we rebuild something better." He stood, buttoning his jacket. The meeting was over, but before leaving, he paused at the doorway. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think revenge was about proving someone wrong. But today, I realize it's about proving yourself right by doing what they never could." He looked back one last time, eyes steady, voice like steel. "Prepare the announcement. The airline is grounded indefinitely." Gasps filled the room. Some wept quietly. Others stared at him like ghosts, seeing truth for the first time. As Elijah walked out, cameras flashed outside the building. The press had caught wind of the shutdown. Questions flew from every direction, but Elijah said nothing. He simply stepped into his car, closed the door, and looked at the horizon. A quiet smile crossed his face. Not out of victory, but peace. The world would soon learn the truth. That power means nothing if it lacks principle. And as his car disappeared into the city traffic, one thing became certain. This was not the end of Elijah Kane's story, but the beginning of something far greater. The morning after the shutdown announcement, the airline's headquarters felt like a ghost town. Desks sat empty. screens frozen on halted operations, and the faint echo of whispers filled the halls. Fear had replaced arrogance. Uncertainty had replaced power. And at the center of it all, Elijah Kane stood in the conference room, calm and composed, waiting for one final meeting. This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. This was about truth laid bare, in front of everyone who once looked down on him. The boardroom door opened. The HR director, pale and nervous, stepped in. "Mr. Kane," she said quietly, "the employees you asked for are here. Bring them in," Elijah replied, voice even, eyes steady. Two figures entered, the receptionist and the gate supervisor. Both looked smaller than before, stripped of confidence, holding their hands tightly together. The same people who had laughed, rolled their eyes, and denied him dignity now stood before him, trembling under the fluorescent light. The rest of the board sat in silence. Watching Elijah took his time before speaking. He opened a folder on the table. This one, not about finances or stock value. It contained a list of every discrimination complaint filed within the company in the last 5 years. Each one ignored. Each one buried. He looked up slowly. "I asked for this meeting," he began, "because this company's failure doesn't start in its numbers. It starts in its people." His voice was soft, but each word landed with precision. "Last month, I was denied a seat, not because I couldn't afford it, not because there wasn't room, but because someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong there." The receptionist's lip quivered. The supervisor's face turned red. "I remember your words," Elijah continued, his tone never rising. "Sir, economy's that way." "You said it with a smile that told me you weren't serving, you were judging." The room was dead silent. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to fade. Elijah took a deep breath, and for a moment, his expression softened. "I don't bring this up to humiliate you. I bring it up because this," he gestured to the papers, "this is not just about me. This has been happening to others. Every single name in these reports felt what I felt that day." He slid the file toward the HR director. "These are the people this company failed." The receptionist finally broke down. "Mr. Kane, I'm so sorry," she said through tears. "I didn't mean to." Elijah raised a hand gently. "You didn't mean to. Maybe not, but intention doesn't erase impact." He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Do you know what's worse than cruelty? Indifference, because indifference builds walls. It teaches people to look down before they look within." The woman nodded silently, tears falling. The supervisor, who had once smirked with superiority, now couldn't even meet Elijah's gaze. "Mr. Kane," he muttered, voice cracking, "I was under pressure that day. We were short-staffed. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please, I'll do anything to make it right." Elijah turned toward him. "You can't undo a moment, but you can own what it means." He paused, then addressed the board. "This company will no longer bury complaints or excuse behavior under stress. We're starting an internal review today, a full-scale investigation into every report filed here. Those who failed to act on them will answer for it. Those who suffered will finally be heard." A hush fell over the room. Even the most seasoned executives shifted uncomfortably. They had never seen leadership like this, not from fear, but from moral authority. Elijah stood and walked to the window. The city skyline shimmered beyond the glass, the same view that once belonged to men who thought they'd never be replaced. "When I walked into this building," he said quietly, "I saw the same arrogance in your reflection that once stared back at me from every mirror of success I built. I've made mistakes too, but I never forgot where I came from." He turned back, facing them all. "You will rebuild this airline, but you'll rebuild it with respect at its foundation. Diversity isn't decoration, it's direction, it's strength." Then, looking at the receptionist and supervisor, he added, "You'll stay if you're willing to learn. You'll undergo full retraining, alongside every senior staff member. Not because I pity you, but because I believe people can change when they're held accountable." The two nodded quickly. Still shaken but relieved, Elijah took a seat again. Folding his hands, "There's one more thing," he said. "I want every employee who filed a complaint, every single one, contacted personally. I'll meet some of them myself. They deserve to see the change they've been waiting for." The HR director blinked. "You'll meet them personally?" "Yes," Elijah replied, "because leadership isn't about distance. It's about presence." He stood once more, signaling the end of the meeting. But before walking out, he looked around the table, one last time. "This company's problem wasn't bad business," he said. "It was bad behavior. And from today, that ends." As he left, the room sat in stunned silence. The same people who once defined success by profit now realized power means nothing without purpose. Outside, Elijah paused at the glass door, catching his reflection. For the first time in years, he didn't see the man others doubted or the mogul the world admired. He saw something else: balance. The receptionist and supervisor watched him go, both silently wiping tears. They weren't forgiven yet, but they had been given something rarer, a chance to become better. As Elijah stepped into the hallway, Maya caught up to him. "Was that closure?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "No, closure is easy. Change is harder, and that's what we're building now." The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. Elijah stepped in, his reflection splitting across the mirrored walls. One man, two sides of history. As the doors slid shut, his voice echoed softly in his mind. Revenge ends stories. Redemption rewrites them. And with that, the elevator descended not into darkness, but into the light of something new. The morning sun spilled across the skyline, glinting off the mirrored towers of downtown. But inside the glass walls of SkyVista Airlines headquarters, the atmosphere was anything but bright. Employees gathered in clusters, whispers traveling like static electricity through every corridor. Something big was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. At precisely 9 a.m., a notification pinged across every employee screen. Mandatory company-wide meeting, CEO, Elijah Kane. The message was short, too short. And it sent a ripple of unease through the entire building. Minutes later, hundreds of employees filed into the atrium. Managers, executives, flight crews, even janitors. The air buzzed with nervous anticipation. Camera crews from major news outlets waited outside, tipped off that something major was unfolding. Then, the double doors opened. Elijah Kane walked in. As ever, dressed in a charcoal suit that reflected both power and restraint. His assistant, Maya, followed a few steps behind, holding a slim folder and a tablet. He made his way to the podium, eyes sweeping the crowd, not with anger, but with quiet resolve. The murmurs died instantly. He began slowly. Good morning. I won't take much of your time, but I will take your attention. Every word carried weight. The room was still. For the past several weeks, he continued, my team and I have reviewed every report, every complaint, every number tied to this company. And what we found wasn't just broken management, it was broken culture. A tense murmur rippled through the crowd. Elijah didn't flinch. This airline, once a symbol of connection, has become a mirror of division, discrimination, neglect, arrogance, hidden beneath polished smiles and expensive branding. You know it. I know it. He paused, letting the silence settle. Cameras clicked softly. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. So here's what's going to happen, he said finally. Effective immediately, SkyVista Airlines will cease operations. The words struck like thunder. Gasps, shouts, disbelief spread like wildfire. What does he mean? Cease operations. Someone whispered. Is he shutting us down? Another voice said, trembling. Elijah raised a hand, silencing the crowd. This is not a collapse, he said firmly. This is a cleanse. This company will shut down indefinitely to rebuild from the ground up. New leadership, new policies, new principles. Not as SkyVista Airlines, but as something better, something clean. A senior executive shot to his feet, his voice cracking. Mr. Kane, with all due respect, you can't just— I can, Elijah interrupted, eyes sharp. And I will— Accenture toward the massive screen behind him. It flickered to life, showing headlines of discrimination lawsuits, leaked internal memos, and employee reviews calling the company toxic. This, Elijah said, pointing, is the truth the world deserves to see, and it starts with accountability. The executive sank back into his chair. Others exchanged nervous glances. Elijah's voice softened now, quieter but more powerful. I didn't buy this airline for profit. I bought it for purpose. Because the same system that humiliated me at your gate was the same system destroying others, passengers, staff, even customers who trusted you. A flight attendant in the front row began to cry softly. Elijah noticed, and his tone gentled. No one here loses today, he said. You're being given a chance, a clean slate. Those who stand for integrity will have a place in what comes next. He stepped away from the podium, speaking freely now. When I was told I didn't belong in first class, I realized something bigger. It wasn't about a seat. It was about a mindset. And you can't fix a poisoned mindset by patching the surface. You start over. He looked out over the sea of faces, some defiant, some ashamed, some quietly inspired. So yes, he said softly, we're shutting down. But this is not the end. This is the reset button the world never expects but always needs. Maya handed him a document, the official order of suspension. Elijah signed it in front of everyone, his pen gliding across the page like the stroke of finality itself. Effective immediately. SkyVista Airlines was no more. Outside, the media erupted. Headlines flashed across every major outlet. Black billionaire shuts down airline after discrimination scandal. Elijah Kane ends. SkyVista plans to rebuild from scratch. Corporate reckoning. Billionaire CEO forces systemic reform. News anchors debated his decision on live television. Some called it bold, others called it reckless. But one thing was certain, no one could ignore it. Inside his private office, Elijah stood by the window, watching the storm of flashing cameras below. Maya stood behind him, uneasy. Do you think they'll ever understand? She asked quietly. He smiled faintly. Maybe not today, but someday, they will. She hesitated. You know you'll be called ruthless, heartless, even— He turned to her. Sometimes the heart needs to be ruthless to stay human. The line hung in the air. Powerful, honest. He picked up his phone, dialing his communications director. Prepare the announcement for tomorrow, he said. We'll reveal the new company name and mission. But not yet. Let the world sit with what just happened. Let them feel it. As he hung up, Maya exhaled. You really meant it when you said you weren't after revenge. Elijah looked out the window again. Revenge burns fast. Change lasts. The view outside showed Skyvista's grounded fleet, rows of aircraft bearing the company's logo, motionless under the fading light. To everyone else, it looked like failure. To Elijah, it was rebirth. Sometimes, he said softly, almost to himself, you have to turn off the engine before you can rebuild the plane. Later that evening, Elijah appeared on live television, composed, confident, and unwavering. Some will call this destruction, he said during the interview, but I call it evolution. You can't fly higher until you clean the air you breathe. Reporters hurled questions. Will you compensate employees? What's next for the company? Was this personal? Elijah paused at that last one. His gaze met the camera lens. Personal, he repeated. It became personal when dignity was treated like privilege. And with that, he walked off the stage, not as a man seeking headlines, but as a leader who just rewrote one. That night, while the media storm raged, Elijah sat alone in his study. The silence was thick, but peaceful. On the table lay a single document, the blueprint for his new vision. The logo sketched at the top read, Ian Air, the airline of tomorrow. Its motto beneath it, every passenger, equal. Elijah smiled faintly, leaning back. The world would wake up tomorrow to outrage, shock, maybe even admiration. But he didn't need applause. He needed progress. Outside, the city lights shimmered like distant stars. The world was watching a man tear down an empire, not out of anger, but out of hope. And as he closed his eyes, the voice of his past echoed softly in his mind. You don't rebuild what humiliated you. You replace it with what uplifts others. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin. But tonight, Elijah Kane rested, not as the man denied a seat, but as the man who taught the world how to stand. The world held its breath. Cameras flashed, news anchors murmured, and millions tuned in across continents. From boardrooms to break rooms, from airport lounges to living rooms, everyone waited to hear from the man who had just shut down one of the world's biggest airlines. The stage lights were soft, not blinding. A single podium stood before a sea of journalists. Behind it, ElijahColeman.com, composed, yet visibly burdened, adjusted the microphone. His tailored black suit was immaculate. But his expression carried the weight of something deeper than power, the weight of principle. The murmurs quieted. The red light above the camera blinked on. Elijah took a slow breath and began. Good evening. I know the world has questions. I owe you answers, not as a businessman, but as a man who's lived through what so many still face every day. His voice was calm, deliberate, but every word hit like a hammer wrapped in velvet. He paused, looking straight into the lens, as if speaking to every soul watching from behind their screens. A few days ago, I was denied a seat, not because it wasn't available, not because of a policy, but because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged there. Gasps rippled through the audience. Journalists lowered their pens for a moment, drawn in. That moment wasn't new to me. I've been judged before in boardrooms, on sidewalks, even in places I own. But this time, I decided something had to change. He leaned forward slightly. His tone deepened. Power means nothing if you don't use it to change what's wrong. Silence filled the room, the kind that presses on the chest. He continued, voice steady, eyes unwavering. When I shut down that airline, people said it was vengeance. But it wasn't. It was surgery. You don't heal a wound by covering it, you heal it by cutting out the rot. The audience was spellbound. Some journalists had tears welling in their eyes. Others simply watched, caught between admiration and awe. I didn't buy an airline to prove wealth. I did it to prove worth, to show that dignity isn't granted by class, color, or status. It's a right that no one gets to take away. Behind him, the large screen came alive. Images of airline employees working together, smiling, training under a new banner, Coleman Air, where every passenger matters. He gestured to it, his tone softening. This is not the end of a company. It's the beginning of a movement. Every employee will return, trained, valued, respected. Every policy will reflect equality, not ego. Every passenger, no matter who they are, will feel welcome. He took a breath, letting the words sink in. Some will call me dramatic. Some will say, it's just business. But to those who've been laughed at, turned away, or made to feel less, this was for you. His voice trembled slightly. Not with weakness, but with emotion, because I've been that man standing in line, hearing whispers behind my back, wondering why my success couldn't silence their prejudice. Today, I want the world to know, your worth doesn't need validation. Your dignity is not up for negotiation. The audience sat frozen. Cameras zoomed in on his eyes, unwavering, resolute, human. To those in power, he said, remember this, every decision you make carries the weight of how you see others. Choose to see humanity, not hierarchy. Then, after a long pause, he smiled, a small, sincere smile that broke the tension in the room. The skies will open again soon, and when they do, I want every person boarding one of my planes to feel something they haven't felt before. Respect. Applause erupted. It started as a single clap, hesitant, then spread like wildfire. Some stood, others cheered. Even the reporters who'd come for scandal now stood in silent respect. Across the world, his words echoed through social feeds, TV broadcasts, and hearts. Hashtags trended. Hashtag dignity takes flight. Elijah Lamon's Bakashi quality in action. In classrooms, teachers replayed the speech. In offices, executives discussed new diversity initiatives. On streets, ordinary people nodded with pride because someone had finally used power not to divide, but to heal. Later that night, as the cameras packed up and the room emptied, Elijah stood by the window of his high-rise office. The city lights shimmered below, endless and alive. Grace, his assistant, entered quietly. "That was incredible, sir," she said softly. "You changed something today." He turned to her, thoughtful. "No," he said. "We just reminded the world that change is possible when courage leads, not comfort." Outside, a plane crossed the night sky, one of his, freshly repainted with the new logo. It gleamed under the moonlight. Soaring silently through the dark. Elijah watched it disappear into the horizon. "Let them fly higher this time," he whispered. "All of them." And with that, the world began to move again, a little wiser, a little fairer, and infinitely more awake. Soft music fades. The narration slows, setting the stage for the next chapter, the legacy his message will create. It began with a sunrise. Not just over the horizon, but over an industry once clouded with arrogance and neglect. Months had passed since the world watched Elijah Coleman close the doors of an empire. Now, those same doors were reopening, but they didn't lead to the same world. The airline had a new name, Sky Unity, and beneath it, a promise where every passenger belongs. The cameras that once captured chaos now captured renewal. Reporters gathered again, but this time, their tone was different. The story wasn't about scandal or revenge. It was about rebirth. That as the first planes prepared for relaunch, Elijah stood at the heart of the transformation, the newly built Sky Unity Training and Leadership Center. Glass walls, open halls, and sunlight spilling across the floors. Inside, people from every background trained side by side. Former employees, new recruits, young dreamers, and even those once marginalized by the old system. The air buzzed with laughter, voices, and possibility. Grace, his ever-loyal assistant, walked beside him as they entered the main hall. "Grace feels different, doesn't it?" Elijah smiles softly. "It feels alive." They stopped to watch a group of trainees practicing customer interactions. A young woman with a hijab was guiding a nervous trainee through a greeting routine, her tone kind, her presence confident. Nearby, an elderly man, retired once but rehired under the new initiative, was teaching to teenagers about service with empathy, not protocol. Elijah's eyes softened. This is what it should have always been," he whispered. The head of operations, a middle-aged woman with a South Asian accent, joined them. Her badge read Director of Inclusion and Experience. "Director, Mr. Coleman, we've implemented your vision. Every employee undergoes empathy training before technical training. We don't just teach them how to serve, we teach them why they serve." Elijah nodded. "Proud? That's how you build respect from the inside out." The camera panned across rooms filled with diversity, skin tones, accents, cultures blending into one harmonious rhythm. People learning, not just to work together, but to understand each other. And then, the tour led Elijah to something special, a mural on the wall, hand-painted by the staff. It showed a jet soaring upward through clouds shaped like hands of every color. Lifting it higher. At the bottom, one line glowed in gold paint. "We rise together, or not at all." Elijah paused, taking it in. His voice lowered, filled with emotion. "You can buy planes," he said quietly, "but you can't buy this kind of spirit." Grace looked at him. "You gave them the chance to create it." He smiled faintly. "No, I just gave them a reason." The narration shifted, cinematic music rising softly under the words. The camera followed Elijah as he stepped into the hangar, where the first Sky Unity aircraft stood, sleek, shining silver with streaks of deep blue and gold. The logo gleamed under the sunlight. On its tail, a simple symbol, to open hands forming a circle, equality in motion. Employees gathered in applause as Elijah approached. The hum of engines mixed with the heartbeat of something greater than machinery. Renewal. A young flight attendant stepped forward nervously. "Sir, I was one of the applicants rejected by the old company. Because of my wheelchair, today, I'll be working on this flight, helping passengers like me." Elijah's eyes glistened. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you're not just flying this plane," he said gently. "You're proving what we stand for." Cheers erupted. Cameras clicked. The story was already spreading, headlines declaring a new era in the skies. But for Elijah, it wasn't about headlines. It was about healing. As he spoke to the gathered employees, his voice carried across the hangar, sincere and unpolished. "You know, when I shut down this airline, people said I destroyed something great. But greatness means nothing without goodness. We can't rebuild the past, but we can design the future, right here, together." He looked around, faces young and old, hopeful and determined, and felt something shift in the air. From this day forward, he continued, we fly not just to move people from one place to another, but to remind them that kindness can travel too. Applause filled the hangar again, not thunderous, but heartfelt, the kind that comes from people who believe. Outside, the runway shimmered under the sun. A pilot waved from the cockpit as the engines roared to life. Elijah and his team watched as the first Sky Unity flight, Flight 001, began its taxi. As the plane lifted gracefully into the sky, the crowd cheered. Some cried, others simply stood in awe. Grace looked up, whispering, there it goes. The dream you built. Elijah smiled, his voice barely above the wind. No, the dream they built. I just gave it wings. The plane soared higher, sunlight glinting off its wings like hope reborn. Cut to scenes of passengers boarding future flights, diverse crews, welcoming them with genuine smiles. Elderly couples, children, business travelers, all greeted equally, all treated with care. News anchors echoed the change. Sky relaunch is being hailed as the gold standard of corporate reform. Elijah Coleman's leadership has transformed not just an airline, but an attitude. In classrooms, teachers discussed his journey. In offices, leaders began reevaluating their own policies. The ripple had become a wave. Later that evening, Elijah sat alone in his office, watching the sunset through the glass walls. The city stretched below, glowing, alive. On his desk, a small framed photo of his mother rested beside blueprints for Sky Unity's next training hub. He whispered to the photo, almost as if she were still there. We made it. Mom, they'll never make someone feel small for simply existing again. Outside, another Sky Unity plane ascended into the twilight, wings slicing through clouds painted gold by the dying sun. The narration softened, the music fading into a hopeful piano theme. From discrimination to transformation, from division to unity, the skies had changed because one man refused to accept them as they were. The final shot, the Sky Unity logo gleaming against the horizon, followed by Elijah walking down the runway, his silhouette framed by the light. Some stories end with power. The voiceover concludes, but this one ends with purpose. Fade to black. A gentle wind carries the echo of vengeance, a symbol that change, once awakened, never truly lands. The world had changed, and so had he. Months after the rebirth of Sky Unity, Elijah Coleman stood quietly at gate A21, holding nothing but a leather briefcase and a soft smile. No entourage, no press, no one rushing to open doors or announce his arrival. Just a man waiting for his flight. The same airport that once echoed with humiliation now hummed with calm efficiency. The same airline that once rejected him now bore the name he'd given it, Sky Unity. And the same gate that had witnessed his silent anger was now the beginning of his peace. A boarding call came through the intercom. Sky Unity Flight 214 to New York. Now boarding all first-class passengers. Elijah walked forward slowly. Each step felt heavier than it should, not with burden, but with memory. He remembered the sneers, the whispered laughter, the sting of disrespect. But today, there were no echoes of that cruelty. As he reached the counter, a young flight attendant, early 20s, bright-eyed, full of energy, greeted him. Her badge read Ava, Sky Unity crew. Ava smiling. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome aboard. May I take your bag? Elijah smiling back. Thank you, Ava. I've got it. Ava, well, we're honored to have you flying with us today. There was no hint of pretension in her voice, just warmth, the kind that made him feel seen, not judged. She scanned his ticket, then looked up with a sparkle in her eyes. Ava. Wait, are you Mr. Coleman, the founder? Elijah, chuckling softly. Guilty. Ava grinning. It's an honor, sir. We all studied your story during our training. Elijah blinked, touched. Elijah. Studied it. Ava. Yes, sir. It's part of our first day orientation. They told us, never forget the reason this company exists. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The weight of her words lingered in the air. He nodded gently. Then you're exactly what we hoped for. As he walked down the jet bridge, the hum of engines filled the silence, a sound that once symbolized frustration, now pulsing like a heartbeat of redemption. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was serene. White leather seats, golden accents, soft lighting, a quiet symphony of murmured conversation and the gentle rustle of newspapers. Elijah took his seat. 1A, the same seat number he'd once been denied. He placed his briefcase by his side and exhaled slowly. The leather creaked softly beneath him. No cameras, no announcements, just peace. Ava returned a few minutes later with a warm towel and a glass of sparkling water. Ava, would you like anything else before takeoff, sir? Elijah, no, thank you. This is perfect. She hesitated for a moment, then added softly, I just wanted to say, your story changed how I see people. Thank you. Elijah smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of understanding. Elijah. Then it was worth it. As she walked away, he leaned back, gazing out the window. The runway stretched endlessly ahead, the same strip of concrete he'd once walked across in silent fury. Now bathed in golden light. The engines roared softly to life. The aircraft began to roll. In that low hum, Memories came flooding back, the laughter of the old receptionist, the sharp sting of being told he didn't look like a first-class passenger, the smirk of the supervisor who turned him away. But instead of bitterness, he felt gratitude. Those moments had carved him, shaped him, driven him to rebuild something broken into something beautiful. The narrator's tone softens, slow, reflective, cinematic. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It whispers. It comes quietly, in the form of peace, not applause. The plane lifted from the ground, wheels tucking beneath the belly like old wounds finally healing. The city fell away below, a patchwork of glass, steel, and memory. As the cabin reached cruising altitude, Elijah opened a small notebook from his briefcase. On the first page, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Power means nothing if it doesn't make the world kinder." He smiled faintly across the aisle. A young boy watched him curiously, maybe 10 years old, traveling with his mother. The boy leaned forward shyly. Boy, excuse me, sir, are you the man who owns the planes? Elijah laughing softly. No, son, I just borrowed them for a little while. Boy, mom says you made flying fair for everyone. Elijah, then your mom's a smart woman. They both laughed gently, as the boy turned back to his window. Elijah looked at him, a reflection of the next generation, one that might never know what it felt like to be treated as less, and that thought filled him with a peace deeper than any success ever had. Hours passed quietly. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in layers of orange and violet. Elijah closed his eyes, listening to the faint hum of the engines, steady, calm, like the heartbeat of progress. He thought of his mother again, of her voice telling him to stand tall. Even when they don't see you. Elijah whispering to himself, you were right, Mom, they see me now. But more importantly, they see each other. The camera lingered on his face, calm, wise, content, no grandeur, no tension, just quiet victory. The narrator's voice fades in softly. Once he was denied a seat in first class. Now he sits not above others, but among equals. His journey wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. The plane pierced through clouds, glowing gold against the fading sun. The world below turned small, peaceful. Ava's voice came over the intercom, warm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Sky Unity. We thank you for flying with us, where every seat, every story, and every soul matters. Elijah opened his eyes, smiling faintly. As the plane soared higher, his reflection merged with the endless sky outside two worlds. Finally, in harmony, the screen faded slowly to black, leaving only his last whispered words. Justice doesn't always need noise. Sometimes, it just needs altitude. A soft piano melody played as the final image appeared. Sky Unity's logo glowing against a horizon of clouds, followed by the line, inspired by true stories of resilience, respect, and change. Fade out.